And here we are for another episode of Genuine Chit-Chat. And this week I am joined by someone whose show I've appeared on recently, actually, to talk about Star Wars. And this gentleman's name is Ike. So this conversation is Mike and Ike, which is a lot of fun. And so, Ike, welcome to the show. Obviously, thank you for having me on your show. And please tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so it's been
Yep, you can go ahead.
Yeah, so it's been it's kind of been, I mean, like, yeah, so it's been, so ever since growing up with me and my brothers, both my brothers are older than me. We've always watched Star Wars and that sort of thing, and so like it was always kind of a part of our lives, but it wasn't like super ingrained into what we did. I know me and one of my brothers, we played like Battlefront growing up and enjoyed doing that. But I think probably really just in the last few years, I started diving into it more, which my brother did as well. And so that's been a big connection point. So my brother lives 10 hours away.
Oh, wow.
I live in the US, so a few states away. So it's been a good connection point as like to build our relationship on and to just have something fun to talk about outside of, hey, like, how's it going? How's life going? How's work going? And so that's been for us kind of a cool connection point over the last in different states and doing that. So that is yeah, so I think especially now, it more than ever, it's been kind of, hey, this is a way I can connect with my brother, stay in a relationship with him, even though we live a 10-hour drive from each other.
That's really nice. Yeah, I don't understand that because with podcasting as a whole, I've certainly found that it helped me with certain social elements of my life, being able to talk to a variety of people and some of the people I met and being able to talk to these people about Star Wars. And I've got a fair amount of friends who like Star Wars, but none of them are into it anywhere near as much as I am. So for me, with podcasting, is the people I've met through it who are into Star Wars a lot. They're some of the people that I like to talk to, and obviously some of those, like my friend Ben of Star Wars Timeline, he's over in America as well. He lives in New York, so he's from the UK to New York. That is a long way to go. Minimum several hours on the plane, but with everything else involved, it's a very costly endeavor. So it's not really something you can easily kind of just pop across to. But I want to ask you. There's something I like to ask everyone when I speak to them about Star Wars, and it's, what is Star Wars to you? And you can answer that question as ambiguously as you want, just kind of the first sort of thing that comes into your mind. If I say to you, what is Star Wars? How would you interpret that, and what are your kind of thoughts on that matter?
Yeah, so I think for me, I've always thought of it as like, it's just a fun outlet. It's a fun like way to spend my time, to a source of entertainment for me. And I think as I've gotten into it, I think with Star Wars being as broad and in depth as it is, like, there's never an end to it. And so like I can always explore more. I always have a book list that I'm going through and like that sort of thing. So for me, it's like I enjoy it because of the element of there's just so much material to it and there's so much depth to it. It allows for just a lot of entertainment and a lot of different ways to just enjoy a different universe. And I think some ways for me, it's like, it can give me a break from reality. So like a break from the busyness of life, a break from just whatever is going on, and just give me an outlet to enjoy something for whether it's an hour or whether it's 20 minutes, and that sort of thing. And so I think that is part of it for me, is just like, there's so much of it. It can go in depth. And I enjoy seeing the connections as well between different aspects of Star Wars. So connections like, we get a character in the Clone Wars that pops up in a book that's also in Rebels, and on so on and so forth. We have all these connections, and I think just diving into some of that is always fun as well. And so I think that for me is like, Star Wars is kind of the outlet. And like we said earlier, like, I've always been around Star Wars to some degree growing up. And so it's always been for me like, I do have some fond memories with it as well. Whether that is playing with plastic toy lightsabers in the backyard with my brothers, or playing Battlefront with my brothers, and those sorts of things. And even like here's more recently going to like opening night of sequels and Rogue One and Solo and some of those with friends, and doing that sort of thing as well. Just kind of building some of those. You got those relationships that come with Star Wars, and just doing life together, but also exploring a different something that's not just our normal reality as well. So yeah, I think for me, it's just an outlet. It's a way to enjoy life and enjoy a great source of entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand that. I'm in a very similar boat. I find that the escapism level of Star Wars is so good. Like the fact that also everyone knows what Star Wars is, and everyone is a fan of Star Wars to a different degree. You know, most people just watch the movies, and then you've got others who watch the series as well. And then you go like one step further than that, and you've got people who read the books and the comics and whatnot. Obviously, the video games is kind of a weird middle ground, sort of. There's a lot of people who play the video games who've never watched the series and things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find that. I find it as escapism as well, when there's so much of life that is busy or difficult or anything like that. You can dive into just a comic or a book or a series, as you say. And one of the beauties of it is what you touched upon there, which is because it's a shared universe, no matter how much content you consume, it still feels like it's adding to stuff. Like I find myself, even if I read a Star Wars comic or book that maybe isn't the best book I've ever read or isn't the best comic, at the very least, it still adds to this wider universe. It still adds to this galaxy. It still adds something, and there's still either characters that potentially pop up or events that occur that are somewhat relevant, or it just has another perspective on things. And I really like that being able to consume a fictional piece of content, and I can dive into the lore as much or as little as I want. And there's certain times I'm like, I'm down for a big old rabbit hole. So you just go down and you're like, I want to know everything about this character. And you read about them in canon and sometimes in legends, and you kind of cross-reference it and things. And one of the things that I love is with the lore of it all, you know, when you learn lore of other things like real life things in history, I often find that it can be, you kind of need to know a certain amount in a way. There's a degree of pressure on what you kind of need to know. Yeah. Once you start learning about like the world wars or something, you kind of need to know a lot about them. But whereas a Star Wars, there's no pressure. With Star Wars, it's just like, know as much or as little as you want. If you want to know everything about every character ever, you can really try. I don't know how well you'll get through it, but you can really try. But I want to ask, sort of connecting with your childhood, you mentioned about Star Wars Battlefront, the game. I assume the original one for the PlayStation 2, or do you mean the more recent one for the PlayStation 4? Did you play them both, or whoa? I've never had that before. I literally just had Zoom kick me out, so apologies for that.
Okay, you're good.
That was very strange. I've never had that before ever. So that was a new experience. So apologies for that. But
no, you're good.
Star Wars Battlefront, you said you played that when you were younger and things. Was that something that you played back when it was on PlayStation 2 as well? Or was it more the new one? Or sort of, I'm intrigued by it because Battlefront 2 I adore as a game. So I just want to ask, which of the two have you played, or which one was the first in a sense?
Growing up, I'm pretty sure we actually played both of them. Nice. I think we played probably two more, the second one. But yeah, I know we played both of them growing up, and on old PlayStation 2, that's actually still at my parents' house. We still have. I'm pretty sure we could probably play it if we went to my parents' house right now. But we still got that. And so it was the original two Battlefronts. We played both of them, but probably played the second one the most.
Nice. And did you play the other sort of surrounding Star Wars games of that era? Because that was like the golden age of Star Wars video games.
Not a whole lot, actually. Those are mainly the two that we got into. I mean, I would also play I remember playing, would have been the two Lego Star Wars that came out, so the complete saga. Yeah. And then I don't know what there's another one too. I don't know exactly what it was, but off the top of my head. But I remember playing those, but that was probably the extent of actually playing Star Wars video games growing up. So
That's fair. I mean, there are a ton of them. I haven't even played
Yeah.
all of them or even close. Like a Battlefront was my sort of entrance in.
Hmm.
Battlefront 1 and 2 were really the games. And then I played the Lego games as well. And then a
Yeah.
few others I played. I played sort of getting slightly later on is on Xbox 360. There's Star Wars The Force Unleashed. I do remember
Hmm.
there's a Bounty Hunter game for PlayStation 2 as well. But when the Disney canon reset happened, it kind of, we didn't really get much for ages. We got Battlefront 1 and then Battlefront 2, the kind of
Yeah.
redos. And then we got Jedi Fallen Order and Squadrons. And then aside from that, apart from like a couple mobile games, there wasn't really anything. Now it's the license has gone past just EA now, so there's a lot more people who can be involved in creating Star Wars content in the video game realm as well, which is very exciting. But sort of with Star Wars in itself, so like obviously we've spoken about the sort of background information and the connections and why it's important to us. I want to ask with
Hmm.
you, so what's your favorite sort of piece of Star Wars content? I know that's quite a big question, but
Yeah.
some people would say this movie or this series or this trilogy. Like if you had to kind of choose your favorite bit of Star Wars content, just what would that be? Sort of if off the top of your head, almost.
That's a tough question. And like you said, it's kind of big and ambiguous, but I would actually say um, probably the Clone Wars, like the animated
Mm,
series, and just like I would say that, and for a couple of reasons. One is I think for me that was really my introduction into more than just the movies,
mm-hmm,
and so that's kind of like I started watching that and kind of got into some of the background stuff and the lore through that, and then I think also kind of with that is the idea like it did introduce me to that lore. It introduced me to we get to dive in and we get to meet Ahsoka and see Ahsoka's character development. We get to see more of Obi-Wan and Anakin and just more screen time, more get to know their characters even a little bit better than just the movies and that sort of thing. So I think for me, like I think that just like really got me into more of the lore and more into that. And I think like, and I always remember like, I don't know if this is, I mean, like I love like the newest season. Season 7 is great, but I always do remember like watching season 6 of the Clone Wars. And that's like where like Yoda goes and visits the wills and all that. Like I always found that very intriguing because it dived into a little bit more Star Wars lore with the Sith and Jedi and kind of that deeper stuff that we don't necessarily see in the movies all the time. And so I think I think that for me, probably Clone Wars, just as a whole would be that. And obviously Dave Filoni is amazing and did a masterful job with all that. So yeah, so I think that would be my answer is Clone Wars.
nice, nice. So you excited about Tales of the Jedi that's coming out in the next month, I think, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I'm super excited for Tales of Jedi. I'm like just a little bit extra, another season of Clone Wars, a little bit different, but yeah, I'm super pumped for that. So that'll definitely be um, really good and excited to dive into that as well.
Are you more excited? So, obviously, being a fan of Clone Wars,
Yeah,
you obviously Ahsoka is like the focal point of the Clone Wars.
yeah,
Obviously, she features in Rebels as well, and it's
yeah.
very briefly in Mandalorian. So, the two-part question, which is, A, are you excited for the Ahsoka series? And coming off of that, is that your number one most anticipated show or piece of content coming out, or do you have something else that's a little bit more exciting to you?
Yeah, I would say Ahsoka is that series, and for multiple reasons. Because I think also like I also really enjoyed the Rebels,
Hmm.
and I've read like the Thrawn trilogies, so I think also like seeing Ahsoka getting more into that, into like with Ezra and Sabine, seeing where all that leads, and I really hope we get some Chiss activity more than just Thrawn on screen, whether that is being in wild space, being in that, being in the chaos, as the Chiss would call it, and just seeing the Chiss ascendancy, or whatever that would look like. Just seeing more of that and seeing that. So I really like Thrawn and Ahsoka. So for me, that is definitely probably my most anticipated, and I'm super excited for that. And like I was actually doing podcasts, I think probably about a month ago. I was recording one and we were talking about, and I didn't realize this actually, but like Ahsoka and Thrawn have actually never met on screen. And so you assume they're probably going to meet at some point on screen with that. And so that'll be a pretty cool interaction and that sort of thing as well. So definitely Ahsoka for several reasons. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that and hoping that is sooner than later.
Yeah, I think we've all got our fingers crossed for that. I'm incredibly hyped for the Ahsoka series. Ahsoka is one of my all-time favorite Star Wars characters. I'm so excited to see her. Still connecting with Ahsoka. Did you enjoy Rosario Dawson's portrayal of her in The Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was well done. I think, and I also like. There's a little bit of like. You gotta give a little bit of grace to, I think, whoever plays Ahsoka, just for the fact that like doing live action compared to animation, I mean, that's so much different and so much harder to portray and do. But I thought Rosario Dawson did a great job with it, and I think that is just that character can be sometimes hard to take from animation, I feel like, to live action and that transition. But I feel like so far they've done a good job with it. I'm excited to see where it goes and see what that is. And I think the other thing, it's hard to say for sure so far because we just got a little bit of taste of it. And I think also like the other thing that's a little hard is like we're seeing an older Ahsoka as well. So we don't know exactly all what's happened to her and what's going on as well. And so I think given that with the Ahsoka show, hopefully fill in some gaps and see we'll have a better feel of it once we get to actually see Ahsoka on screen every week and be able to take in that content and see how they portray Ahsoka and do that. And I think at that point I'll probably have a better say on that. But so far I've enjoyed what that has Rosario Dawson has done so far.
Yeah. I mean, in agreement with you. I mean, Rosario Dawson, before she played Ahsoka, she's one of my favorite actors. I think she's incredible. But I remember when the stuff happened with Ahsoka in Clone Wars and things, and no one really knew where she was going to come in or not. And then she was in Rebels, but then, there's that point in Rebels where like, did she die? Who knows? And they just didn't say anything for like 2 years.
Yeah.
Rosario Dawson tweeted out #Ahsoka lives. And I don't think she knew at that point anything than anyone else, but she connected with that character from early on. And whenever you get an actor or actress who is like that, whenever you get them who they're invested in the character as a fan before they're actually have the opportunity to play them, that for me is it really means a lot. It's just, I don't need everyone who's in Star Wars to have read every Star Wars book or anything mad like that. But when they do have a vested interest as a fan as well, I just find it adds a whole nother layer. And as far as we've seen of Rosario Dawson so far, I think that she is definitely a fan. So with that sort of in mind and, still connecting with the live action series and whatnot, obviously we've had Mandalorian series 1 and 2, we've had Book of Boba Fett, and we're currently partway through Andor at the moment. So of the ones that you've had, which has been your favorite so far? I know that Andor is still ongoing, but the way it has been so far, do you think it could potentially become one of your favorites, or is like Mandalorian's one of your sort of favorite elements of Star Wars, so that's always going to come up on top? Like, what are your kind of general opinions on the live action shows?
I think Book of Boba Fett, it was good, but I think it was probably my lowest, if I'm going to rank them lowest. On there. I mean, if they do a season 2, maybe they do something more with it. I don't know, but I think as of right now, that was to me the most disappointing. Just partially also just because there was a lot they could have done with it, and I don't feel like they did near as much as they could have, or they could have done a lot of different directions. But I mean, I'm really liking Andor so far, so we'll see where we go with that. I think Andor has potential to be maybe the best show they've done so far.
Hmm.
And I think also like, and I don't think you mentioned, but it's like the Kenobi show.
Oh, of
I did
course, yeah.
appreciate what they did with the Kenobi show. The one thing I appreciated with Kenobi show was how much we saw a young Leia,
Hmm.
and Kenobi going to Alderaan, and at the end, and everything that goes on with that. That was not the storyline I thought they would go with at all. Like the first time I remember, I think it was first episode we see Leia, and I'm like, what's happening? Like I was not expecting this at all. But so I did like that. But I'd say so far, probably Mandalorian is my favorite.
Hmm.
And I think I do really enjoy uh like just the Mandalorians in general. So I'm excited to see like where they go with season 3 and beyond. Like what, because I feel like with season 1 and 2, and yeah, you got Grogu, which is a big part of it, but they are leading up to something
Hmm.
very Mandalorian specific. Whether that's retaking Mandalore and restoring Mandalore, or whatever they do with that, and seeing just where that goes, I think is will be interesting. And there's a lot of lore with Mandalore, and the Mandalorian culture and all that. And so, especially with the black saber or the dark saber involved, and all that, like we'll see. I'm hoping we get to dive into that a little more and see where that goes. So I'm excited for Mandalorian season 3 and just seeing where that goes. I'd say right now probably is my favorite, just because of where it's going, and potentially seeing kind of a restored Mandalore
Hmm.
and some things of that nature, and just even some things like reading like Legends material from the Old Republic and some of that, like some of the things I think they could potentially pull,
Hmm.
and bring into canon and some things of that nature. So I think it'd be pretty cool. We'll see what happens with it and where it goes, but um, yeah, so I think Mandalorian will be a good season 3, and probably, I'm guessing probably the season I'm gonna like most.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm hoping so as well. It's funny, really, because like I'm in agreements with you. For the most part, I think Andor, if it continues on the way on its trajectory at the moment, I think it could be the best live action series. Because like I love the prequels, I love Kenobi, and I thought the series was great, but I feel like that would have actually worked better as their original plan of being a movie. I feel like if it was 2.5 hours or maybe 3, then it would have really, and it was released in one go, and you could just watch it in one, that would have really helped it. But I found that the episodic nature of it kind of hurt the story a little bit. I loved the Leia stuff, and I loved Anakin and you know the flashbacks of Anakin, and I loved Obi-Wan and Vader facing off in episode 3 and then again in episode 6. I love all that, but I just found that there was a lot of filler in a sense, and there was just a lot of stuff I wasn't as invested by. I'm agreeing with you with Book of Boba Fett. I found that it was quite disappointing of how good it could have been, and especially because you had those 2 Mandalorian centric episodes, and they were almost better than most episodes of the Mandalorian, but they weren't part of the Book of Boba Fett show. He wasn't even in 2 of them, so you were just a bit like, you didn't feel like you had faith in this show. And then Kenobi, it felt like there was a lot changing behind the scenes. Whereas with
Mm-hmm.
Mandalorian series 1 and 2, it felt like the finished product, what they released, was kind of what they set out to do. And that's with
Yeah.
Andor, is how I'm feeling at the moment. Andor, there's
Mm-hmm.
no goofy moments, there's no weaker parts. I'm just like, oh, this is serious, and it's gritty, and it's grounded, and
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying it. I'm very intrigued to see where it goes. Out of interest, what did you think of Star Wars Visions when that came out? Because obviously that was very different, being outside of canon and Legends.
Yeah.
What were
Yeah.
your kind of thoughts on that?
I enjoyed it. It was, I mean, it was a uh like it was just fun to see a different style of Star Wars.
Hmm.
And I mean, because I think I have some friends that are really into like anime and that sort of thing. I'm not much into anime, but I think for them it was a cool, like they got to see Star Wars in anime, which is pretty cool. And so I think just the concept of what they did with it was really neat in telling some different stories that, I mean, never been told. And I mean, they kind of had a blank slate in some ways when they just did it. And so,
Hmm.
so I enjoyed it. I mean, it definitely wasn't like my favorite, but I mean, I think it was a, um, another neat kind of outlet they did to use a different type of animation and do that to create some more Star Wars content. So I think the concept behind it was pretty cool and what they did. Like I said, I mean, kind of neutral to it just because like it doesn't tie into anything really. I mean, we have like the only thing, I mean, we had like the Ronin book, I think, which I haven't read yet, but I know like that kind of came from that. But like outside of that, we don't get a whole lot. So I thought it was good. It was a neat outlet for Star Wars and kind of Star Wars diving into other ways of telling Star Wars and finding new ways to do that. So yeah, I thought it was kind of a neat idea and a neat way they did that, especially with like the shorts. Like it wasn't like, oh, like I got to sit down and watch it and take in this big long story, but I mean, it's just easy to take in and watch and enjoy.
Yeah, I agree. It was a nice experiment, like a nice sandbox for them to play around in. And then, yeah, it was quite a flip of a coin almost. Each episode was like, some of them were like, this is incredible. Whoa, this is really amazing Star Wars. I think like 3 or 4 of them were like that. And then a couple of them were like, this is a bit weak. And a friend of mine, because I did a review of it when it came out, it's sort of myself, my partner, Megan, and then our 2 friends, Jack and Rhea. And all of us had a different least favorite episode. They were all generally the same. 4 episodes were our least favorite. We all had a slightly different one. And I remember Jack specifically hating the TOB1 episode, the kind of Astro Boy-esque one. And I was like, I wasn't the biggest fan of that, but I didn't like hate it like he did. But he could not stand it. And it was so funny hearing him like somewhat rant about that character. And so I find that Visions, like, I wasn't that excited for it when it came out. I was like, yeah, I'll watch it because it's Star Wars. And when they announced the series 2, I'm like, I'm happy we're going to get more cool, weird, different stories. But there's also that part of me that's like, with all anthology stories, there's always a couple of weak ones. So it's like, I'm excited, but I'm also wary because there's going to be a couple of rubbish ones to watch.
Yeah. And I was kind of hoping like it would be like, all 6 of them would connect to each other to tell a little bit more of a full story. Because, I mean, it's hard to tell much of a complete story in 15 minutes. And so, which is what some of them were. And so I think, like, I would have liked to see them do it where it was 6 episodes that were 15 minutes that all connected to each other and, like, that sort of thing. But they did what they did, so...
Yeah, I totally get what you mean. I'm hoping in Vision Series 2 maybe there'll be a couple of concepts that they've continued. Like, I love the style of the Ronin. I loved that. So if they do another one of those, I'd really like that. There was The Ninth Jedi, which was probably, I'd argue, maybe the best one, and The Village Bride. Both of those were so cool and so many cool concepts in it. And I'm hoping that maybe with canon, they'll take a little bit of inspiration from Visions. That's kind of my hope, is that people are going to play around with it, and then maybe they create a couple of stories and they go, hey, this started as Visions, but we've kind of let it go into the canon. I mean, there's certain Vision stories that will not work in the canon in the way it is, but there are other ones which could probably, if work slightly, could fit in, which I'd be very interested to see. Yes.
So have they announced a season 2?
Yes, they've I think it might be coming out late next year. They've opened it up to more animation studios. So it was just, I believe, Japan who had it for Series 1. But Series 2, there's a Spanish studio that's got a couple episodes out. And then also, I believe, an Irish one. And the only reason I know about the Irish one is because there's a film out which is only on Apple TV Plus, but it's called, it's quite bizarre, but it's called Wolf Walkers. And I watched it because I had Apple TV Plus when Ted Lasso was out and things, and I'll get it back when Series 3 comes out. But I gave it a go, this show. And if anyone's listening who's got Apple TV Plus, try out this movie because it will surprise you. But it's an animated, and it looks all hand-drawn, and it's basically about a group of people living near a village who can turn into wolves. That's the general premise. But there's certain scenes that the animation style is so good. From what my friend Rhea said, I'm fairly sure that one of the studios confirmed in Visions is one of the ones that made Wolf Walkers. So I'm very intrigued to see obviously we've had a lot of sort of Japanese animation styles I'm very intrigued by, but also the rest of the world will have their own, because I know that like Spanish, for example, will do a lot of stop motion, so I don't know if they're going to use some stop motion stuff. So if they did something like that, I'd be very intrigued.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't realize that. I mean, I haven't paid attention a whole lot to Visions or looked into that a whole lot, so I didn't realize they'd done that. But yeah, that'll be good. And I think the other thing we kind of mentioned it, but with Visions is just like, I feel like it also brings in another set of eyes, gets people's attention that may not be big into Star Wars, but it gives them a new aspect to Star Wars that they may out, that they may check out an animation like this that they may not watch, like Clone Wars or something like that. And so I think that just kind of that aspect and seeing, I think bringing new creators into Star Wars is a good thing. Kind of have that fresh set of eyes. So
yeah, I agree. One of the terms I've heard to describe Star Wars is it's like a buffet. Is that you've got the things that most people enjoy and stuff, which are the movies, but then you've got, if you just want to watch the series, you can. If you just want to read the books, you can. If you however much or little of Star Wars you want to consume, you can. Not everything is for everyone, but it's all there for you to be able to get if you want it. Which, I mean, it's one of those funny things. When Disney Plus was announced, a couple of years ago, I was like, I'm just going to have this for Star Wars and probably the Marvel stuff. And I was like, I'm probably going to even maybe cancel it at points when there's no content. And then it's like, oh no, there's going to be content. Basically, for a Star Wars and a Marvel fan, there's content basically every bloody day. I'm never going to be out without it.
Definitely.
I want to ask them, linking in with that somewhat, are you, a lot of individuals I know who are into Star Wars tend to be into other fandoms. Some of them are into Star Trek, some of them are into Marvel and DC and those sorts of things. I personally do watch all the Marvel content, and I say all of it. Pretty much all of it. There was like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and stuff that I didn't catch, and there was like Inhumans that I didn't catch either, but all of them, the Disney Plus specific shows that have been going on. I've caught all of them and I've been watching all the movies. I was just intrigued with yourself. Obviously, you've got the Star Wars podcast. That's a very obvious one. But with other fandoms, as it were, not just the ones I've mentioned, but what sort of content do you consume outside of Star Wars, if you don't mind me asking?
So I think Marvel is another one. I'm not super into it, but like I got especially when I was in high school, like I had buddies that loved Marvel, so I'd tag along and go to opening night stuff with them all the time. And so it kind of I've gotten into that through them, but like, I think I've stayed up to date kind of with some of the Disney Plus stuff. I'm always behind on it, but, I do watch, and pay attention to some of that. So I do enjoy Marvel and what they've done with that and, all that. And then I'd say the other big one for me would just be, Lord of the Rings. So my grandpa was like he loved the Lord of the Rings shows. And so like growing up, we always watched like the movies. And so like when the Hobbit movies came out, we'd go opening night to those. I've read the books and all that. And I know they have the show releasing now on Amazon Prime, which I haven't watched yet. I don't have Amazon Prime, so I'm kind of like, I'm going to get like once the whole series is out, I'm going to get like a 7-day free trial and then watch them all real quick and check that out. So yeah, I'd say probably Marvel and Lord of the Rings are two outside of Star Wars that I pay attention to and enjoy taking in and enjoying those stories as well.
Yeah, it's funny with Lord of the Rings because even though I massively love Star Wars, obviously, I think the Lord of the Rings trilogy is a better set of movies than probably anything Star Wars has done. I think Return of the King is probably one of the best films ever made ever. I used to have them on DVD, the normal editions, and I used to watch Return of the King all the time. And then I got on Blu-ray the extended editions of the Hobbit movies and Lord of the Rings, and I was like, these are even better. I don't even know how they did it. Like there's an extra like 3 or 4 hours all in all. I think Fellowship is 45 minutes longer. I think Two Towers is about an hour and a bit, and then I think Return of the King is like an hour and a bit as well, because Return of the King ends up being like 4.5 hours long, and it's like we watched it, myself and Megan, we watched it during lockdown. COVID lockdown and things, because obviously we had infinite time for a little while, and so we were like, let's sit down and watch these. And I was like, I'd seen Fellowship extended before, but I hadn't seen the other two. And I was like, they've made them even better. And now it's made me kind of, I wanted other movies I enjoy to do that. Like I love the Harry Potter movies. I was like, why didn't they release extended version of those? And with like the original Star Wars trilogy, could you imagine? Because there's like deleted scenes which are still considered canon, but you can't just, you can't legally just watch like, the whole movie with the deleted scenes that I kind of put into it. And I'm like, I wish we could have that. I wish we could have extended versions of all my favorite movies that Lord of the Rings did.
That would be pretty neat. And especially some of like the original Star Wars trilogy, just because like some of those movies, I mean, like they're not super long movies anyways.
No.
So to make them extended probably is just going to make them as long as most movies are nowadays anyway. So like, so I mean, really you're not like you're making a 4-hour movie. You're just making it 3 hours or whatever. So that would be pretty cool to see.
Oh man, it would make me so happy. I'd throw all my money at Disney. They're already getting loads of my money anyway with all the books I buy and Disney Plus and all that jazz. So I wanted to ask with Star Wars in itself, we kind of rein it in to specifically the 11 movies, obviously the 9 episodes and then Solo and Rogue One.
Yeah.
Now, I would probably argue the original trilogy is almost objectively the best, but that doesn't mean that they're my favorites. For me personally, the prequel trilogy I enjoy watching more than I enjoy watching the original trilogy, even though I think the originals are probably better. Although I do still really enjoy the sequels. I think I think all the Star Wars movies are great in their own right. I don't think any of them are bad. But from your perspective, like what is your personal favorite of the movies? And then do you have like a preferred era in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, man, that's a hard one. Always hard when I feel like I get asked this question and then I never have an answer to it right away.
It changes every day almost.
yeah, exactly. I think for me, I would always probably say I think my favorite Star Wars movie is Return of the Jedi.
Nice.
And I just enjoy that. I think I've always enjoyed seeing like a Jedi Luke that is fully a Jedi and just the interactions there. And I think for me that is always kind of nostalgic also, but also just like I love that movie. But I'd say era wise though, it'd probably be prequels. And kind of as I think I mentioned this earlier, it's like that's kind of the era I grew up with. So like I grew up with those 3 movies coming out. And so like for me, like that was really like what got me into Star Wars to start with and to really enjoyed those as I was younger and that sort of thing. So I think, probably favorite era is prequels and that sort of thing. And I always have to give Rogue One an honorable mention just because it was so well done and definitely up there for maybe the best well done Star Wars movie, especially of any of the newer ones. I would say I think it was super duper well done. I enjoyed that so much. And I also wonder if that's a little bit why Andor show right now is the way it is, because we're getting some of that and seeing kind of that same directing, same type of thing we got in Rogue One. We're also getting an Andor, which I appreciate and enjoy so far.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because I think Rogue One is probably the best made Star Wars movie of the Disney era. It's better made than the prequels as well, I'd say. The prequels, I love them, but they are very flawed movies. And so Rogue One really just hits out the park for storytelling. And I think the funniest thing I find about Rogue One is that when the premise was announced, I was like, what? Why on earth would I want a film about the mission where they got the Death Star plans? And then you watch it and you go, God damn, this is very good. This is the film that no one asked for. And then everyone just unanimously goes, yeah, this is incredible. This is just such a good movie. And it's just like with Andor, really. When they released the Andor show, I was like, we're getting a prequel of a prequel with a set of with basically the main character. We know what happens to him. I'm not very intrigued. But then watching it, and it's basically like, obviously with Star Wars Rebels, for me personally, Star Wars Rebels is my favorite piece of Star Wars content that exists. I love the Clone Wars, don't get me wrong, but Rebels for me really hits home. And this is basically just like, what about Rebels, but it's not animated and not centering around this found family? It's actually kind of the opposite. It's the darker side of the rebellion. It's the, you know, when you get Andor at the start of Rogue One, the first thing he does is kill his mate with a bad arm. And you're like, oh no, this is not a kid's film. And so Andor is like, how did he get to that point over the years that it's going to do time jumps over inevitably over the 2 seasons? I'm just like, I'm so intrigued by it. And I think when Star Wars surprises people, I think that's the best time. Because like with the Kenobi show, Kenobi was a lot of fun. I'm glad I watched it. But we all knew how it was going to end. We all knew all the characters in it, bar like 3. Yeah. So it was weakened a little bit by it being this sort of in-between movie, in between episodes 3 and 4. Whereas I find that when you have Star Wars, like Mandalorian kind of came out of nowhere. No one expected Mandalorian. They announced it, and then you're like, okay, a gunslinger, I guess, sort of. And then some of us who like Clone Wars and Rebels had an idea of what Mandalorians were, but they did such a good way of creating the show and creating the character of the Mandalorian to have him separated from the other Mandalorians we've seen and get him finding himself. And I just think where Mandalorian didn't have this weight of expectation around it, it meant that it could kind of be free to do its own thing. And I'm thinking that that's how Rogue One kind of survived. And that's also what Andor's going to be doing, in a sense. Yeah.
I think also part of it, at least for me, is like Mandalorian and all those and then Rogue One and Andor is like, we're also seeing like, because I always love to be able to see like what was going, like we get it. So like, especially during like the original trilogy, and we get this a lot with Rogue One and Andor right now, is we're getting some like what is happening in the Empire kind of behind the scenes. And like we're kind of getting to see some of these side elements of like, I mean, just even like being able to see different planets that we didn't want to see. And like Andor, we see Coruscant in the trailers. So like we even see that like up front, we're going to see that in the Andor show. And like, we don't see Coruscant at all in the original trilogy. And so like just even some of those, like what's Coruscant gonna look like in the original, like during the time frame of the original trilogy. And I think just some of those things, like because we know Coruscant is plays such a major role, is the political power in the galaxy and like that sort of thing from a planet standpoint, like, but we don't get any of it in the original trilogy. And so I think just like some of those things behind the scenes, and I think that's a lot of like what Rogue One did and Andor has done so far, is like we get to dive into some of those. And I think that's a lot of fun. And honestly, I think I mentioned this earlier with Kenobi show. Some of my favorite parts with the Kenobi show is like when we got to see Alderaan and a young Leia and like those sorts of things that like it gives us more insight to what was going on during that time than just the original trilogy did. And I think they're doing some similar things with the Mandalorian. And so I think I always appreciate when we get some of that, like as they tell a story, we also get the side background things along with it. I think it helps make those stories for Star Wars fans just that much more enjoyable, and be able to see some of these things like, oh, it'd be cool to see Alderaan during the Imperial reign and like that sort of thing, which we don't get to see. And so I think it's just fun to see some of those different aspects.
I agree completely. It's very well put. Yeah, because there are so many. In the original trilogy, you know, you go to certain planets, but a lot of them are off-world. They're weird, sort of in the outer rim planets and things like that, because it's a rebellion trying to hide from an empire. So you don't get to go to the core world, you know. And I agree with you completely, where being a fan of things, you're like, okay, if you're going to go to an era that I've already seen elements of, show us what's happening to places that are in prior eras of Star Wars in this new era, so it still feels fresh. You get some of those new planets and things, but yeah, Coruscant was something that I really didn't even think about when I saw the trailer or when I watched the first episode or two. It didn't even connect with me. And then when I think it's episode 4, when you go to Coruscant, when I saw the planet, I was like, oh my god, I'm so excited for them to go to Coruscant, because I've seen prequels, it's so important. In the original trilogy, it's not even mentioned. And then the sequels, they completely avoided it as well. Yeah. And it's a bit like, okay, what what was going on, as you say, what was happening at this time. And The Mandalorian as well kind of delves into post-Imperial era. So yeah, what you said there about Coruscant and everything, I completely agree with. It's a really interesting concept, and it's something that I'm, as a Star Wars fan, it's one of those things I get excited about. Is like, you know, we know the broad strokes of the plot, but getting to see the minutia, getting to see like the Imperial Security Bureau, getting to see inside of that as well, and things like that.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I just appreciate that. I mean, like, because that reminds me, like, with Mandalorian, like, it makes me like, when the Death Star gets blown up at Endor in Episode 6, it's like, okay, it's not like the whole Empire just blew up and disappeared. Like, when we get to see some of those remnants of the Empire in Mandalorian and seeing kind of some of the, like, the Imperial still trying to survive and do what they were doing and continue on. And so, I mean, I just even think, like, seeing some of those aspects that we want to get to see otherwise is like kind of telling that story behind the scenes, and seeing some of that, I think, is part of that brilliance to some of these shows. Yeah,
I agree, and I'm excited to see what comes next with Andor or some of the other things, because that's it was funny as well, because where Mon Mothma is meant to play quite a key role in Andor.
Yeah.
Before it, I was like, oh yeah, Andor, yeah, whatever. I'll be excited because I'm a Star Wars fan, but then once I saw Mon Mothma in the trailer, I was like, oh, she's going to be a major role. I was like, she's actually a character that I didn't realize how much I wanted to see about her until seeing it. Because as you say, behind the scenes with like the Senate and the actual, how hard it must be for someone who's trying to fight an empire while trying to look like you're not. For me, the Mon Mothma scenes are almost more interesting to me than the rebellion elements of it almost, what Andor's doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, just even putting those pieces together with Mon Mothma, of where she's at when we see Rebels, and like, this is pre the Rebels series, and so like seeing some of that of like how she got from, I mean, we see how she got from the prequels era to this to now, like, Rebels era, and seeing kind of that in between, like, I think it'll be really interesting as they continue on.
Yeah, I agree completely. And so sort of lining in with more expanded content and things, I want to ask, with the sequel trilogy, so obviously the sequel trilogy is something that has had controversy around it, but the prequels did as well, and I think both of them are equally good trilogies in different ways, but I think they both did a lot right, and they both had things that could be worked on. Now, one thing that really causes division in the Star Wars era is it's mainly Last Jedi, it seems to be, but the sequel trilogy as a whole. Of the three movies, which one was your favorite, and which one do you think is the weaker of the three? Because everyone has a different opinion on this, so I'd be really intrigued to know, of just those three, episodes 7, 8, and 9, how they rank in your mind.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, like, I think my favorite is Force Awakens. I think. Not that Force Awakens is like a spectacular movie, but I remember like sitting in theaters and I'm like, this is Star Wars. Like, I can enjoy this. Like, this is taking me to a galaxy far away, starting to tell a new story, and like it gets it has that Star Wars feel that we desire to have when we get new Star Wars content. And I think that, like, that aspect, like, carried that movie, and it did it well. Like I said, like, it wasn't like, oh, this is the best movie in the world and mind-blowing, but it was well done and gave us that feel like, hey, this is Star Wars, this is new Star Wars content. And especially as they started to explore a new era of Star Wars with Disney, and also just post the original trilogy and all that. So I'd say, I think my favorite, just to sit down and enjoy watching, is Force Awakens. I would actually say, I'd actually probably say my least favorite is Rise of Skywalker. I think, which is part of my, the kind of a mixed, part of the reason I don't like Rise of Skywalker is, and the biggest reason is, I think the story is plausible. The story could be, I can buy the story, I can do that. But I think for me it's already a long movie, and I feel like they rushed us through it. Like, I feel like I was like listening to an audiobook on 2 times speed, like that sort of thing. As I was like, I mean, like we get into it, and like one of the first scenes is like, oh, Palpatine survived, and like okay, where in the world did this come from? Like, where are we going? I think for me, it was just like it was so fast. Like I felt like for me, like the first part of Rise of Skywalker should have been like in The Last Jedi. Like that should have like had that set up. And so I think for me that was probably my least favorite, just because I feel like it's so rushed in a lot of ways. And I think the continuity between directors, as we know, was a little rough there, and everything that happened is like it was just like, okay, like I feel like J.J. Abrams was trying to go back to tell what he wanted, and then just rushed it. And so I mean, yeah, and I enjoyed The Last Jedi actually. I thought it was a pretty good movie. I think my biggest issue with The Last Jedi is that my biggest issue with The Last Jedi is the Rise of Skywalker. And I think what because I remember when we walked out of Last Jedi, I remember telling my brother, I was like, that wasn't a bad movie. Like I enjoyed that, but I think what will make a big difference is what they do with the third installment of the series of the trilogy. Is like The Last Jedi will, in a lot of ways, I think sometimes make or break how good, or the Rise of Skywalker will make or break how good The Last Jedi actually was. And so I think just the discontinuity there is part of that for me. And just I think how rushed the Rise of Skywalker was just like let's slow down here. Like what's going on? Let's dive into this a little more, and let's not go from Rey cutting a rock in half to floating in the air 10 feet above the ground. And like, how do we get there, sort of a thing, I guess, for me. And so, I think that was Rise of Skywalker was kind of probably my struggle with that. And I think as that would have been done better, I think Last Jedi could have been received better as well.
Yeah, that's very well put. I mean, your analogy for the audiobook being on times 2 speed is perfect. That is, as you said, that just cracked me up, because it was like I enjoy all three of the movies, but I agree with you. I think The Rise of Skywalker is the weakest for all the reasons that you stated, and I just think there were Last Jedi kind of took, Force Awakens created the world at that point in a sense, and then took it somewhat in a direction, and then Last Jedi pushed it further in a slightly different direction. Yeah. And then, as you said, it's kind of like it felt like JJ came back and went, let's just kind of taper that back in. So you've got this weird. It's not like a straight line. You've got it's like a big curve, but you're like you didn't go anywhere with the plot. The things you tweaked and brought back, it just, as you say, it took away somewhat from The Last Jedi. And every day of the week, I think about, do I prefer Force Awakens or Last Jedi? And I think at my core, my favorite, like the thing I remember going to the cinema and seeing The Force Awakens and never thinking I'm going to get to see another Star Wars movie again, and having that crawl come up. Like nothing hit me in Star Wars like that did. Yeah. And then Last Jedi I really enjoyed, even though it has some jarring moments. It's got, the Leia in space scene is like, that could have been done a bit better. The fact they killed Akbar and a few others off screen. You're like, there are lots of little parts to it that are a bit jarring in a similar way to the prequels are in certain ways. There's just certain scenes that happen in the prequels and you're like, okay, is this bit again? Whereas like Rise of Skywalker, I find didn't have any scenes specifically that were like jarring like the prequels that The Last Jedi had, but instead it just, as you say, it rushed through certain bits and then kept ramming extra stuff in, and it felt like by the end of it you had more questions than you had answers, and it's like, but I feel like this should be the full stop, not the open-ended stuff. And there's loads of little things I think about after the fact, and I know obviously years after it's come out it's easy to say this, but I'm just like, they included Rey's lightsaber right at the end. Why didn't they have that at the start? Why couldn't it have started with her making her lightsaber? Wouldn't that have made more sense? And then she could have just had Anakin's broken lightsaber with her. And that's what Ben Solo then uses to kind of, to win. And there was like the flashback with Luke and Leia. I was like, that was cool, but why is this now? Why was this not in like one of the previous movies? Why have you put in the finale, put a flashback about Leia just being like, oh yeah, she was very force sensitive. Was she? Yes. And let's never talk about it again. So what? Well, if this was in Last Jedi, that would have made sense with her doing the Space Mary Poppins stuff a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, like, I enjoy all of the films of the sequel trilogy. I enjoy all the Star Wars films. My least favorite piece of Star Wars content is actually the Clone Wars movie. I've watched that a few times, and each time I watch it, it's slightly worse than last time. But the series is really, really good, especially after like series 2-ish.
Yeah.
But The Rise of Skywalker, I felt like the thing that, as a Star Wars fan, I think that frustrates me the most about it is that, as you say, the broad strokes of the plot and the sort of big points were fine, but you've just got all these little bits in between, and there's certain elements that it didn't feel like a film made by someone who loved Star Wars. It felt like a film, my friend Dave says, like made by a committee. It was almost like, we need this in it and this in it and this in it, and let's just get it out and finished.
Yeah, definitely. And like, well, it's like, I also feel like two things go with that. Is like, I think The Rise of Skywalker, like the premise for Rise of Skywalker, I think that could have been 3 movies in itself.
Oh yeah.
Like, you have one movie that explores Palpatine a little more, what all happened there, and like, I mean, just all that could have been like, that could have, Rise of Skywalker could have been the premise for the whole sequel trilogy. And I think like that, and I think the other thing that probably didn't help The Rise of Skywalker either is like, I like when we talked about like, felt like it was watching it 2 times speed or whatever. Like, also sometimes I felt like when we were with Last Jedi, I felt like The Last Jedi was really slow at times. Like where are we going? Like, I feel like we didn't cover much ground from when The Last Jedi started to when The Last Jedi ended, and so that probably makes it even harder when you're trying to finish up a trilogy to say like, hey, this is what we're doing as well. And so I think just the lack of continuity with all of it was just rough and very evident. Still Star Wars, I still like it and still enjoy it. And I mean, and I definitely think there's some aspects of this like, I don't know what a show would look like, what like a standalone movie would look like for some of this stuff, but like that we could fill in some of these gaps in Rise of Skywalker, that we could add to, like, well, just some of these things that are going on that would give more context to the sequel trilogy as well, I think could be worth our while. And just, I think that would be something I'd be interested in if they ever go that route. But I think that could be a fun thing to explore and like kind of add and build on to that. I mean, in some ways, a little bit like the Clone Wars adds to the prequel trilogy. Seeing a show somewhat in that same vein, same idea with as the Clone Wars, and adding to what is going on.
Yeah, I agree. Because you could either do it one of 2 ways. You could either do like a Tales of the Jedi kind of thing, which obviously, as we know, is going to be, I think, 6 episodes, 3 about Dooku's fall and 3 about Ahsoka at various points in her life. Yeah. If we had one of those about Rey, and then maybe another one about like Luke around that era, and we kind of got a bit more context, and one about Finn, maybe. I'd love to see. We got a taste of it in the Lego Holiday Special, Finn post episode 9, where he's force sensitive and stuff. It's like, that was another issue with Rise of Skywalker, because he kept trying to tell Rey something, and I thought he was going to tell her that he loved her, and then JJ came out and said that no, he was meant to tell her that he could feel the force. And I was like, well, now that you've told me that, it makes sense in the film, but why didn't you make it more obvious? Why didn't you make him, him and that woman that was with him, who was like an ex-stormtrooper, why didn't she slip off the ship and he like reaches with a force and holds her in place for a second? Just like some little hint. But you were like, oh no, he can kind of hear the force somewhat. Oh yeah, and that's it.
Yeah.
But why haven't you gone fully into this? It sounded like they had like 10 ideas, and they're like, let's just go with all of them. And you're like, right, but we don't have time for 10 ideas in this film. We have time for 3. And they go, okay, well, let's give a bit of Palpatine. Let's not say how he got back. Let's not confirm how he came back. Let's not even do his speech thing that he did. That apparently to hear that you have to listen to it in fortnight. And I'm like, this is not the right way to go with the finale of a trilogy. Yeah. And with you say with Last Jedi, like, there were pacing issues with Last Jedi, and there were parts of it that I found a bit jarring. But I found the weakest thing from the kind of start of Last Jedi was they decided to start it literally minutes after the end of Force Awakens. And it's like, you get the original trilogy, and there's, I think, 3 years between 4 and 5, and then about a year between 5 and 6. Yeah. And then with the prequels, you've got about 10 years between 1 and 2, and then about 3 years between 2 and 3. With the sequel trilogy, you've got like an hour between between 7 and 8, and then I think it's only 6 months to a year between episode 8 and 9. So the whole sequel trilogy takes place over about a year, which is smaller than the smallest time jump between any of the other movies. And I just don't really know why they did it. It's so weird. You didn't get that chance to allow characters to breathe. You could have had flashbacks in Last Jedi. If you said that Last Jedi is a year later or something, what happened to Rey on the island with Luke? You could have had her training with Luke on the island for a lot longer. You could have had some sort of element of that, or not had her finish the film at Luke's island, have part of it like her spent ages trying to find it. There are just a lot of little missteps along the way, and they seem to have just kind of rolled with these missteps instead of trying to taper them in a way until it's too late.
Yeah, and I do agree. And I sometimes I forget about that, but just like the timeline of the sequel trilogy is so weird compared to the other two trilogies. It's like give some space for. I mean, even from because I was sitting here thinking, even from a marketing standpoint, like give space for us to be able to put a series in between episode. I mean, it's literally not impossible, I don't think, to make a series between episodes 6 and 7 because it's such a small time jump. Yeah, you probably could between 7 and 8 or 8 and 9, but it's just like, even from like a content standpoint, it's hard to add content in there to what is going on with the story anyways. And so I think just like, it just makes such a weird jump and a weird time frame there. So, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and you mentioned about the series as well, and I think a series like Clone Wars or Rebels would really help the sequel trilogy. They tried to do it with Resistance, but I watched all of Resistance. It took me ages to get through. It was a slog, and I don't recommend it to people. It's one of the only bits of Star Wars content that I say to people when they've asked me, should I watch Resistance? I'm like, probably not. Like, I find the Resistance is weaker than Series 1 of Clone Wars, and I think Clone Wars Series 1 has got some brilliant episodes. Episodes like The Lair of Grievous is some of the coolest episodes of Clone Wars, but you just have a lot of fluff in the middle, and with 24 episodes, you only need like 10 really in that first series that are any good. But with Resistance, it was, there was like 16 odd episodes per series. The whole of the first series was so hard for me to watch, like so hard to get through. It was so boring. And then Series 2 was better, but in that Resistance has only taken place over a very short period of time, and it doesn't really connect with the sequel trilogy that much. The Series 1 ends when The Force Awakens starts, so you get Hosni and Prime blow up and things, and that's connected to one of the main characters. But then it doesn't really amount to anything. And then Series 2 is like, it's happening at the same time as The Last Jedi, but it doesn't really seem to be connected to it at all. Whereas with Clone Wars and Rebels, you get pivotal things that happen that connect, or like Rebels is so far, it starts off a few years before A New Hope, and then as it gets closer and closer, as more connections, there's like a couple of arcs which are connected to Saw Gerrera, and obviously that connects with Rogue One. You get like Lando pop up, you get Mon Mothma pop up, you get other characters, Leia pops up as well. You get these characters, so you're like, oh, I'm getting a connection to the original trilogy while it's standing on its own feet. But Resistance, it felt like, because the Resistance was made while the other films were being made, they were so restricted in what they could do, and the animation style was quite different, and they seemed to aim it at a much younger audience. There's all these strange, jarring elements, and it was just quite bizarre. Like, I don't know did you ever catch any Resistance?
Yeah, I think I watched. There's just 2 seasons, right? Yeah. I think I watched both of them, and I agree. It's just like I do feel like it was geared towards a very young age group, and also like you said, it didn't have it didn't have any significant connection to the rest of the story. And so for me, it was just like you said, it's kind of a slog to get through, and it was what it was. But so for me, it's kind of like, okay, great, we'll move on and go find something more exciting to watch. So
yeah, totally. It's like when people talk on some of the Facebook groups or forums and things I'm a part of, and they go, oh, should I watch Resistance? And it's like, I never want, because a lot of people worked on Resistance, even Dave Filoni did actually work on it to a degree. And I never want to say any content that someone creates isn't good, because the amount of work that went into it. But it's just one of those things where it just felt so flat. And I feel so bad when I tell people, when they're like, should I watch Resistance? I'm like, probably not. If you're desperate to, and you're like I was, and like I think you were, whereas like, I need to watch all the movies and then all the series. Everything else I'll try where I can, but there's so much other content is near impossible. But I can just kind of deal with exactly what I can kind of manage. So with Resistance, I was like, yeah, I'll get into it. And then I started series 1, and it's the only Star Wars content I really had to force myself to watch, which is quite sad. But if we kind of change gear to some more optimistic elements and things, is if we speak about the wider Star Wars galaxy, but not through the screen, but through books and comics. Now, you already sort of mentioned, and I know in your conversation with your brother, you mentioned about the Thrawn books, and I know that you did an episode which featured about Thrawn as well that I listened to. Yeah. So is Thrawn sort of, or are the Thrawn books your favourite Star Wars books that you've read? I'd just tell us a little bit about the Thrawn books, and then any other sort of, and connected with that, if they're not your favourite book trilogy or books, what your ones are, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think Thrawn is definitely up there. I think we get a glimpse of Thrawn and Rebels, and it takes the Thrawn trilogy to just another level, another. We get to see who Thrawn is, and I think it's definitely up there for probably my top 3 more of like books and that sort of thing. So, which there's 2 Thrawn trilogies that are canon, and then there's one that is not canon as well. That's Legends material, but I think the other thing I appreciate about what they did with Thrawn trilogy as well is that they actually took quite a few things from the Legends one and brought it into canon with those books. And so they definitely pulled that. And part of that's probably because it's the same author that did all 3 trilogies. So makes it easy to do that in a lot of ways. But I think, Thrawn is both the canon trilogies, they're great trilogies to read. They are, one tells about Thrawn more during the prequel era, when he's kind of rising to the ranks in the Chiss ascendancy, and what they call the chaos, or what we hear more as a wild space in the unknown regions. And so I think that's the other fun part about it is we get to see, at least to my knowledge, some of the most content that we get that's like wild space, that's beyond the known galaxy, that we see in the trilogies, movie trilogies and things. And so I think for me, that's a lot of fun. And then we also just kind of get to see how second trilogy dives into like how Thrawn rose in the ranks of the Empire, how he got into the Empire from wild space, and how his relationship with Vader is very, I find that always fun and very intriguing. And his relationship with Tarkin, and the Emperor and everything that happens there as well, I think is, it's, I very much enjoy that just because it's a different piece of Star Wars that is, kind of does its own thing, kind of does its own, tells its own story, but also relates to the Skywalker saga as we know it, as well. And so, Thrawn's definitely out there. I think the other one for me is actually the Ahsoka book by E.K. Johnston, and it takes place in between. It's in between season 7 of Clone Wars and Rebels, and it is just extremely well done, and just gives a little bit more backstory to Ahsoka and what she was doing, and during that time frame and that sort of thing. And so I think I very much enjoyed that book as well. I'm trying to think what else.
Because did you ever was the Thrawn books, were they where you started reading Star Wars?
I'm trying to think what they might. I think those were the first ones I read. I think when I started really diving into the books, those were the first ones I read. So
it's funny because I think Ahsoka was the first one I read, because obviously when I've actually got it over there. That's why I was looking over that. I was like, can I reach it from here? I was like, not quite. But the Ahsoka book obviously was made when Clone Wars got cancelled after Series 6, and then they were like, we're probably not going to be able to finish Ahsoka's story. And then she pops up in Rebels, and it's like, we don't have time to go into the details of Clone Wars. So they let E.K. Johnston, look at the scripts and things and work with what happened there. And then you get in a few flashbacks with her sort of confrontation with Maul in the Siege of Mandalore. But one of the things I loved was, her finding herself in the universe, kind of seeing what it's like post Order 66, because most Jedi got killed then, or they had like a specific mission, like Obi-Wan or Yoda. Yeah. Whereas she didn't really know what to do with herself, and she just tried to go out and be a good person without trying to show off she's a Jedi, but she kept doing things not dissimilar to Cal Kestis in certain ways, where just couldn't help being good. And then in doing that, they kind of out themselves and have to leave. And I liked that element, and the fact that you get to hear about sort of lightsaber purification, like of a red crystal and things, was such a cool idea.
That was neat. Yeah,
I love that element. So you bring up the Ahsoka book is one that I say to people, if you're a fan of the Clone Wars and Rebels or Ahsoka in general, it really adds a lot to the character. And I think they're going to be touching upon, there's rumors, not leaks, I don't talk about leaks, and I try to avoid them where I can, but there's rumors that one of the Tales of the Jedi episodes is going to kind of retell what happened in the Ahsoka book, where she's confronted by the Sith Lord and gets the crystals and things, because we haven't seen that actually happen yet. In the High Republic, there's a character who did it in the book Shadow of the Sith. Luke mentions doing it, and he does it for to help someone, but we don't actually get to see the purification process. Just like on screen, we've not seen lightsaber bleeding. So I'd be really intrigued to see in Tales of the Jedi have Dooku bleed his lightsaber crystal, which would be very intriguing to see, and then watch Ahsoka purify hers. I would love that. So the Ahsoka book's a really good shout.
Yeah. And I think, both those, I'm excited to see that. And I hope we do see the bleeding, lightsaber bleeding, just because Dooku has the same hilt, I'm pretty sure, that we see in the trailer as he does in the prequels. And so I'm hoping we see that. But I think also like another book, I don't think this is Legends, but A New Dawn, which is about Hera and Kanan, Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus. And prior to the Rebels TV show, I really enjoyed that book as well. That was it. Very well done as well. I mean, I could go on with books. There's a lot of good ones. I know. I mean, we talked when you were on my podcast recently here. We discussed the High Republic and those books and everything, that era as well. And so, I mean, I've really enjoyed those. I would say the other books I've actually read that I've found very intriguing. They're I think they're geared towards probably teenage young girls, but is the Padme trilogy, which by E.K. Johnston as well, and that's a really good trilogy. And for me, I just enjoyed getting more of that background on Padme and like kind of the inner workings of when she was queen and when she was senator and everything that happened with that as well. So I enjoyed that. So, but yeah, there's a lot out there. But I'd say Thrawn is a great ones to pick up. And then also I think Ahsoka is probably up there as well, especially if you like Clone Wars or Rebels or anything like that.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the Padme books, the Queen's trilogy, because you're the second or third person who's mentioned them to me. And it's one of those things where, there's only, I'm trying to make sure I read every single piece of High Republic content that I can. So I'm still making my way through Midnight Horizon. And when I finish that, I'll be up to date. And then in a few weeks time, we've got the phase 2 coming out. Yeah. But aside, I'm trying to keep on top of everything High Republic, and then all the other books kind of come second. I listened to the audiobook of A New Dawn, and I thought that was quite cool hearing about Hera and Kanan meeting. And then with the Queen's trilogy, though, it's just one of those trilogies where I was like, maybe I'll read them at some point. But I think it's one of those trilogies that so many people have recommended them to me and said that, especially as a prequels fan, there's so much cool stuff because you get to see like what the Queen and what her handmaids were doing during the events of the Phantom Menace. And parts like that.
And it's neat. My wife gave me a really hard time when I bought I think the last one, because I don't know why I'm like this, but like whenever I buy hardcover and they have like the cover to the hardcover, like the paper cover. I can't stand having that on a book, so I always take it off. But when I took it off, like the hardcover like is like a bright hot pink. And so my wife, so I'm like, anytime like I'm sitting there reading, she's like, I think she took a picture and sent it to the rest of my family. And it was like, Isaac's reading a girl's book here, and that sort of thing. And so, it's definitely geared towards young girls, but it adds a lot to who Padme is and that. So, but yeah, it's a good trilogy. I would recommend it. Get into it at some point. I know there's a lot to get into.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny though, isn't it? Because even when, I think that's the beauty of Star Wars, is that certain elements of it, even if it can be, the primary audience can be a certain demographic of individuals, but you can still find ways to pick them up and still enjoy them. And you especially, you may not be the main key demographic that's being focused on, but it just shows how good E.K. Johnston is of an author, that she can create content maybe aimed at someone else, but it still works for someone not the primary audience. So that's really cool. As we're we're getting nearer at the end here, we'll start to wrap up a little bit, but I want to ask just a couple more questions here. One of them was just about sort of comics. Now, I myself, I personally, I think in the general idea of how content is consumed for Star Wars is movies is the main thing, then series, then games, then books, then comics are basically at the bottom. They're the least consumed piece of Star Wars content, and that's fine. I speak to plenty of Star Wars fans who've read loads of books, haven't read any comics, and I totally understand that. Out of interest, have you read many of the comics in any Star Wars era?
I think I've read like 3.
Wow.
So not very many at all.
That's fine.
So, and they're all High Republic. So is all I've read. Actually, my local library, they have given out like free, just having like sitting out free issues of some of the High Republic comics. So nice. I just happen to like, take them and look through them and read them, and but that's the most I've ever interacted with any Star Wars comics.
That's fair enough. Well, I'd say what I generally say to people is you can do something called Marvel Unlimited, and you can do a week trial of that, or it might be a couple weeks trial of that, and I really recommend people check that out because it has got the vast majority of Star Wars comics, both canon and legends. But there's if you're interested, and any listeners this confirms to as well, in the Ahsoka novel, when she purifies a lightsaber crystal, if you want to see what it's like bleeding a lightsaber crystal, whether or not it happens in Tales of the Jedi, hope it does, but if it doesn't, there's 2 books, were 2 comic collections by Charles Soule, who obviously is one of the High Republic authors. He wrote Light of the Jedi. He wrote 2017 run of Darth Vader comics. I believe there are 20 of them. And I would say that's some of the best Star Wars you can read. It's just after Revenge of the Sith. It's Vader getting used to being in the suit and kind of finding himself, but he also bleeds his lightsaber crystal, and that is like one issue. And I think it's just issue 6, so even if you just read the first few, I really recommend checking those out. And there's another series by Charles Soule, which is The Rise of Kylo Ren, and that was the episode I just released on my Star Wars show. I did it originally for my first ever episode, but I didn't have the format down exactly what I wanted, so I changed the format and have now redone it. And it's 4 issues, and it just shows what happened to Kylo Ren straight after the temple, after he did that thing with Luke where he crushes Luke with the heart in Last Jedi. And you get to see how he became the leader of the Knights of Ren, how he bled his lightsaber crystal, what actually happened to him after that point. So those are the 2 comics I'd recommend to people if you have time between all the book reading and stuff. Even if you just do a trial on Marvel Unlimited, because you can find them there, it's really worth checking those 2 out in particular, and that will kind of give you a nice in, because a lot of people, there's a main run of Star Wars comics. There's one from 2015, which is 75 issues, and that's by Jason Aaron, and then there's the 2020 run, which at the moment is on issue 27 or something. And the main run of Star Wars comics I enjoy, but I really do not recommend them for people as first-time comic readers or getting into the Star Wars realm. A lot of people go, just start with Star Wars, and then you read them and it's like it's all about Luke, Han, Leia, and Chewie, And they're fun, but the problem is where the first batch is set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and then the second batch is set between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. The vast majority of it, there's no stakes of any kind. There's just none. Because you know exactly, you know none of them are going to be too injured before any of the films or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I always recommend the Vader comics, because although you know Vader's going to survive, you get a lot to Vader that you don't get to see anywhere else. With Kenobi, we got a bit of it, and you get a bit of it in Rebels as well. But for the most part, from Revenge of the Sith to A New Hope, or Rogue One technically, you don't get much Vader. So I would really recommend the 2017 run of Darth Vader comics by Charles Soule, because they tell a really good story. You get a lot of inner workings of the Empire kind of turning into, or the Republic turning into the Empire, and it does connect with Rebels in a lot of cool ways. So I do suggest them to anyone listening as well. So the sort of final sort of mentions with, I say Star Wars, is there's one question I wanted to ask you before we wrap up. And that was just Star Wars in itself. I think what sets apart from other sci-fi and space fantasy things is primarily the Force and by proxy lightsabers and things. Now, the Force is obviously in Star Wars, it's a very spiritual thing. Everyone kind of interprets it in different ways. And I myself, one of the ways I kind of perceive the universe to some degree, I may be an atheist or an agnostic, depending on what day you get me. But I don't necessarily believe there is a God, but I believe that the universe has a degree of consciousness, and that we are beings of light and energy, and that's kind of what pushes the universe. And I'm always intrigued when I meet individuals, whether or not they are religious or spiritual, if in the elements of Star Wars that tackle the Force and spirituality, do those parts connect with you especially, or do you find with having a religious preference of your own, you don't necessarily connect with that element? I just wonder if you could tell me any amount that you would about if Star Wars' spirituality side of things, if that does connect with you at all.
Yeah, I think, it does. I think the Force is, it always has intrigued me. I think is a way to, that there's I think in some ways, like, the Force isn't a being, but it kind of points to a greater being, a greater purpose within the Star Wars universe, and that sort of thing. And so I think for me, it has always connected in some ways. So my religious background, I'm a Christian, and so I'm actually a pastor. But for me, I think it has been a connection of, like, I think also, like, there's a element just of, like, I think the Jedi and seeing what is good in the world, also balanced with what is not. There's bad things in the world as well. There's things that are harmful, and I think most people agree on. I mean, here in the States, we just had hurricane go through Florida, and kind of the East Coast, and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of been, I think most of us would agree that, like, something like that happening and killing people, along with just the damage that is done, is, like, that's not a good thing. And, like, we can all agree on that for the most part. I think a lot of people would. And so there's this, I think for me, it's just that element of, like, I can connect to this good and bad that we see in our world, that I also believe in my faith. There's good and bad in the world. There's for me, that is Jesus is the good side of it, and we have what he has done for us on the cross and that sort of thing, in my faith and what I believe. And so for me, that is the kind of the light side. And for me, is how Satan works in the world and what is going on and the evil things that are happening and harm that is done to people. And part of what me as a Christian would believe is living in a fallen world, and that sort of thing. And so for me, there's been always that balance, and that, like, kind of like I can see that in Star Wars as well. And for me, it doesn't necessarily like, the Force is the same thing as God for me, but it's there's similarities. There's things we can take away from it as well. And I think one thing, and I hadn't thought about this a whole lot before, but I think also, like, for me, it's like there's so many lessons in Star Wars that we can take just and apply to life. I was having a conversation a little bit ago, or I think earlier here in September, for one of my guests. If you guys listened to the episode, with Big T and Little T, they're a father son that do podcasts, and the dad was just talking about how, like, for him, Star Wars is a way to teach life lessons to his kids. And I don't know what his faith background is or anything like that, but I think that for me also is like, we can just learn life lessons and how to live life a little bit better from different elements in Star Wars and that sort of thing as well. So, yeah, definitely. I think that would kind of be my answer to that. It is very interesting, I think, always to see like there's that religious element to what happens in Star Wars with the Force and that sort of thing. So yeah. Does that answer your question? Or
oh yeah, it does.
Any further questions with that?
That's brilliant. I mean, I really appreciate being open and honest with that element of things, especially something as personal as a religion to yourself. But yeah, I think Star Wars, I think one of the beauties of it is that whether or not you are a religious individual or not, whatever degree of spirituality one does or doesn't believe in, and any of the major religions, I feel like Star Wars has enough in it that it can connect with someone on those right levels. You know, the idea of good and evil is something that I think transcends all religion in a way that it can all be viewed. And as you say, the lessons that one can learn in Star Wars, it's very telling. And when I eventually have kids one day, I want to show them Star Wars. I've got in my basket at the moment on Amazon the 3 sort of really young novels of the High Republic. You know, the ones that are basically redone versions of the adult notebooks with pictures. And I'm like, I keep looking at them. I'm like, I'm going to buy them all just so when I have kids, I can read them those elements of Star Wars. And I think there's so many lessons to Star Wars, as you say. And I just think that, the ideas of good and evil, and like Jesus is almost like, I do not want to blaspheme in any way before I say this, but it's almost like he's like the original Jedi almost. He's like, he's how the ideal way of living, regardless of whether or not you believe in religious. Jesus, the whole idea of him is he's meant to be the best of us. He's meant to be an individual who shows that's how you make the right decisions. You know, there's that age-old term, what would Jesus do? Even if you're not religious, you can still see that the things that Jesus did, he was trying his best. He was doing what he believed to be right all the time. And I think when you look into the Jedi, the epitome of what being a Jedi truly is in the right ways are people like Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, people who are willing to suffer and go through these hardships. You know, with Obi-Wan especially, there's a lot of imagery, I think, with Jesus in that realm, even him spending so long on Tatooine in the desert. So obviously Jesus spent 40 days, 40 nights in the desert and things. And I think it's just, you can learn so much from the ideas of Jesus, and you can learn so much from the ideas of what it is to be a good person. And I think Obi-Wan and characters like that are the poster children of that in a sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's always hard because it's like none of that is like verbatim, and it's not like exactly the same, but there's always, like you said, there's elements in that sort of thing of seeing those connections and those ways that I think it's kind of what we talked about before, is like, for us, like, Star Wars can be kind of an escape from reality. It's something to enjoy. But part of the reason I enjoy it, at least, and I'm guessing you do, is there's also aspects of real life in it. There's aspects of things we can connect to in that aspect. And kind of on a faith-based side, but not quite as serious, other thing I was going to mention here is, I know as I have read the Bible and learned and that sort of thing, that also as I read the Bible and as I read like Star Wars books or things like that, it's for me, it's been fun. Every once in a while you can be like, oh, that name, like, I'm guessing might have came from the Bible, or like some, like, I can't think of a good example right now, but like kind of an obscure name for a planet was a landmark in the Bible or something like that. And so I think for me, like, and that's more just a fun kind of random thing, but like I've seen that connection as well. It's just kind of piqued my interest. I was like, that's interesting. And where that might have got pulled from, or I mean, even if it wasn't like directly from the Bible, just the meaning of that word for whatever that George Lucas was doing or the creators were doing, the reason they picked that. And so I just found that kind of intriguing as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I mean, it is one of those things. I love the connection Star Wars do to in-universe and outer-universe. There's there are lots of fun little things. Like there's certain species that are named after other things, and it's because the Latin word of that actually means this thing. So exactly. I know the kind of stuff you mean. And when you find those little bits, you're like, oh, wow, that's cool. Like being a Star Wars nerd, you kind of get rewarded. Yeah. So I totally get that. And thank you once again for sharing with the religious side of things. So, We'll wrap up here then. Please tell people, obviously I'll put links in the description. I'll even put a link mentioning the conversation you had with Big T and Little T so people can check that out straight away. But I'll put a link to your social media and your podcast feed and all those things. But please, is there any sort of final words about anything at all that you want to say to the audience before we wrap this call up?
I think for me, like Star Wars, and we talked about this as well, is like Star Wars is just an escape, a place to have fun. I mean, like there's serious things we can learn about it, but also part of it, just have fun with it, enjoy it. And I think at the end of the day, like on my own podcast, I tell people a lot of times, I'm like, I'm still learning. Like I want to learn more stuff. So like, I love having conversations. Go find people to have conversations with. Come find me. I'll have texting conversation or DM conversation with you. I just love talking about Star Wars and learning about different aspects of Star Wars and that sort of thing. And so, just enjoy it. It's a place to have fun, a place to relax and kind of get away from the world.
Perfect. Well, thank you once again, Ike, for coming on the show. It's been delightful being able to return the favor after you very kindly had me on your show. And it's been great being able to chat with you for so long about something we're both so passionate about. So just
definitely.
Thank you so much once again for coming on the show. And we'll have to collaborate again in the near future.
Yeah, definitely. It's been great being on, and I've enjoyed it a lot.